The year is 2026. But is it? The system that gave us that number was invented by one man, in the 6th century. Working from calculations that most scholars now believe were wrong, he never meant for it to last 1,000 years. It did anyway. His name was Dionysius Exiguus. He was a Scythian monk working in Rome, and in the year 525, he sat down and calculated when Jesus was born, using that birth as the anchor point for all of human time. He called the year of the birth, year 1 of our Lord, Anno Domini, and every year before it, before Christ, BC. The system worked its way across the Christian world over the next several centuries, and it has been the dominant global dating framework for over 1,000 years. The problem is that Dionysius almost certainly got the date wrong. Herod the Great, the king under whose rule every account says Jesus was born, died in what our calendar calls 4 BC, which means Jesus was born before the year 0 of a calendar designed to mark his birth. By his own system's logic, the year is probably closer to 2030. Tonight, the calendar. Who built it, what it replaced, and what it got wrong. The calendar you live inside has a structural error built into its foundation, and the man who built it knew he was working from incomplete information. Herod the Great, the king under whose rule every gospel account says Jesus was born, died in what our calendar calls 4 BC, which means Jesus was born before the year 0 of a system designed to mark his birth. Dionysius didn't just get it slightly wrong. By his own criteria, using his own anchor point, the year right now is closer to 2030. And that is the least strange thing about how we got here. Dionysius was working on an Easter table, a calculation of when Easter would fall in future years. The previous Easter table used a dating system called the Diocletian era, named after the Roman Emperor Diocletian, who was one of the most brutal persecutors of Christians in the empire's history. Dionysius found it distasteful to number years from the reign of a persecutor. He decided to replace it with a system numbered from the birth of Christ. Using the calculations available to him, the Roman consular lists, the Alexandrian astronomical tables, the gospel accounts, he worked backward to establish when Jesus was born. He placed the birth at the beginning of year 1 AD. His system has no year 0. We go directly from 1 BC to 1 AD, which means every attempt to date events precisely across the BC/AD boundary requires an adjustment. The calendar has a structural gap built into its foundation. The second problem is the Herod question. The Gospels of Matthew and Luke both place the birth of Jesus during the reign of Herod the Great. And Herod the Great, according to the Roman Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, whose chronology is accepted by the overwhelming majority of scholars, died in the spring of the year we call 4 BC by the Dionysius calendar. If Herod died in 4 BC, and Jesus was born during Herod's reign, then Jesus was born before year 1 of a calendar designed to mark his birth. The calendar is off by at least 4 years, possibly 6 or 7 if we allow time for the flight to Egypt and Herod's continued pursuit of the child. Dionysius made an error, and that error became the foundation of the global dating system. Coming up, what happened in October of 1582? 10 days that simply ceased to exist. And the reason it took some countries 170 years to accept it. In 1582, Pope Gregory XIII issued a papal bull called Inter Gravissimus. It announced a reform of the Julian calendar, the calendar that had been in use across Europe since Julius Caesar introduced it in 45 BC. The problem with the Julian calendar was drift. Julius Caesar's calendar assumed the solar year was exactly 365.25 days. The actual solar year is approximately 365.2422 days, about 11 minutes shorter. That gap of 11 minutes per year had accumulated over 16 centuries. By 1582, the calendar was 10 days out of alignment with the actual seasons. This mattered enormously for Easter. The Council of Nicaea in 325 AD had established that Easter should be calculated from the spring equinox. By the 16th century, the Julian calendar placed the spring equinox on March 11th rather than March 21st. Easter was being celebrated at the wrong time. Pope Gregory's solution was decisive. 10 days would simply be removed from the calendar. Thursday, the 4th of October, 1582 was followed immediately by Friday, the 15th of October, 1582. 10 days ceased to exist. And to prevent future drift, the new Gregorian calendar modified the leap year rule. Century years were not leap years unless also divisible by 400. The year 1900 was not a leap year. The year 2000 was. The Gregorian reform was immediately adopted by Catholic countries. Protestant countries resisted for decades or centuries. Britain and its colonies did not switch until 1752, 170 years later. The American founding fathers were technically born in the old Julian calendar. The Orthodox churches largely kept the Julian calendar for religious purposes, which is why the Eastern Orthodox Christmas falls 13 days later than the Gregorian December 25th. The Gregorian calendar and the AD year number are not the only active dating systems in the world right now. Several others are in continuous use, and each one produces a different answer to the question, what year is it? The Hebrew calendar, still used for Jewish religious purposes, dates from the traditional rabbinic calculation of the date of creation. This system is called Anno Mundi, AM1, the year of the world. By the AM1 calendar, the current year is approximately 5,786. Not a geological claim, a religious dating system anchored to a textual event, still used to determine when Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Passover fall each year. The Ethiopian calendar, which connects directly to our previous episode on Jubilees, is approximately 7 years behind the Gregorian. The Ethiopian New Year falls in September, and the Ethiopian calendar has 13 months. By the Ethiopian calendar, the current year is approximately 2017. The Ethiopian Church has been counting time differently from Rome for 1,500 years. The Islamic calendar, the Hijri calendar, is a purely lunar calendar anchored to the migration of the Prophet Muhammad from Mecca to Medina in 622 AD by the Gregorian system. It currently places the year at approximately 1,447. Because it is purely lunar with no solar correction, it shifts against the seasons. Ramadan falls at a different time each year in Gregorian terms. The Mayan long count calendar places the current date as a position in a 5,125-year cycle that began in what the Gregorian system calls 3114 BC. This is the calendar that generated enormous public interest in 2012. Due to a misreading of what its end date actually signified. The question, what year is it, has multiple valid answers depending entirely on which system you are using to count. But there is one more calendar question before we move on, because it connects everything we have just covered to a number most people have never heard. The Seder Olam Rabbah. Compiled in the 2nd century of the Common Era by a rabbi named Yosef ben Halafta. Its name means the Great Order of the World, and it is exactly that. A complete chronological account of history from creation to the time of Alexander the Great, built from the biblical genealogies with obsessive precision. The problem is that the Seder Olam's year count may be carrying 166 years of missing time, and if it is, the framework it was built to support places us much closer to its endpoint than anyone is officially counting. The Seder Olam is the primary source for the Hebrew Anno Mundi calendar, the year of the world count. Every Jewish religious date, every Rosh Hashanah, every Yom Kippur, every Passover, all of it is calculated from the year count the Seder Olam established. It is still in active use today. In synagogues worldwide, the current year is approximately 5,786. Here is the problem. The Seder Olam accounts for the Persian Empire, the period between Babylonian captivity and Alexander the Great, as lasting approximately 52 years. The external historical record places the Persian Empire at approximately 218 years. The Babylonian astronomical tablets, clay records of planetary observations made by Babylonian astronomers cross-referenced with known celestial events, date the Persian period precisely. The Persepolis Administrative Archives, the Behistun inscription carved by Darius the Great into a cliff face in what is now Iran, a trilingual royal proclamation dated to a specific regnal year. All of them converge on the same answer. The Persian Empire lasted approximately 218 years. The Seder Olam gives it 52. The gap is 166 years. Now, what do you do with 166 missing years in the most precise chronological document in the Jewish tradition? Scholars have debated this for generations. Some argue the Seder Olam was deliberately compressed for theological reasons, to place the destruction of the Second Temple at a specific point in the 6,000-year framework. Others argue it represents a genuine chronological tradition that differs from the external record. The debate is not settled. But the arithmetic is straightforward. The official Anno Mundi count is 5,786. Add the missing 166 years, and the corrected count is approximately 5,952, which brings us to Psalm 90, verse 4. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by. The Talmudic tradition, specifically Sanhedrin 97, builds on that verse to produce one of the oldest eschatological frameworks in Judaism. The world will exist for 6,000 years. 2,000 years of chaos before the Torah. 2,000 years of Torah. 2,000 years of the Messianic age. And then the 7th millennium, the cosmic Sabbath. The world resting as God rested on the 7th day. By the corrected Anno Mundi count, 5,952, the year 6,000 is approximately 48 years away. I want to be careful here about what I am and am not claiming. I am not predicting the end of the world. The Seder Olam's Persian period compression may have a straightforward historical explanation. The corrected count is an estimate. The 6,000-year framework is a theological tradition, not a mathematical prediction. What I am saying is this. The calendar question is not just about whether Dionysius got the year of Christ's birth wrong by 4 years. It runs deeper. The most ancient, continuous year count in active religious use today may itself be carrying 166 years of compressed chronology. And if the compression is real, the framework it was built to support places us much closer to its endpoint than the official count suggests. That is worth knowing. Whatever you do with it. Coming up, who actually decided our year number, why it won, and what got replaced to make that happen? The part that connects to everything else this season. The Julian calendar that the Gregorian reform corrected was itself a reform. Julius Caesar introduced it in 45 BC to replace the Roman Republican calendar, a deeply dysfunctional system in which the pontiffs, who controlled the calendar, had been inserting extra months for political reasons. Roman politicians extended years to keep allies in office or shortened them to remove enemies. The calendar had become a political tool. Caesar brought in the Alexandrian astronomer Sosigenes to design a mathematically sound system. The Julian calendar was the result. 365 days with a leap year every 4 years. A genuine improvement, just not quite accurate enough. Before Julius Caesar's reform, there was the Roman calendar attributed to Romulus, the legendary founder of Rome. This was a 10-month calendar. The year began in March, which is why our months September, October, November, and December are named for the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th months. The Latin prefixes septem, octo, novem, decem, 7, 8, 9, 10. January and February were added later, and the names have never been updated. Every calendar we use today is a layer on top of a previous layer on top of a previous layer. The Gregorian is a reform of the Julian. The Julian is a reform of the Roman Republican. Every reform was justified by its inventors as a correction of drift or error. Every reform replaced something. And what was replaced, the system that existed before, was declared wrong by the people who replaced it. The Gregorian reform was not merely a mathematical correction. It was an assertion by the papacy of its authority over the measurement of sacred time. Protestant resistance to adopting it for 170 years was not ignorance. It was political. They refused the Pope's calendar. Up next, the honest position on what year it actually is, and the question you will not stop thinking about after this episode ends. Let me state what I believe the evidence shows and what it does not show. The BC/AD year number is almost certainly wrong by at least 4 years. The Herod problem is not contested by serious scholars. It is the mainstream historical position. If Herod died in 4 BC and Jesus was born during his reign, the calendar is off. The year is approximately 2030 by internal logical consistency. The Gregorian calendar's solar tracking is accurate. The reform that removed 10 days in 1582 corrected a genuine drift. The mechanism works. The year number attached to it was inherited from an earlier error. The alternative calendars, AM1 Hebrew, Ethiopian, Islamic, are not more or less correct than the Gregorian. They are different systems anchored to different events, serving different communities. The question, what year is meaningless without specifying the system. What the calendar question reveals is something about the nature of the official record more broadly. The dating system we live inside was not discovered. It was chosen. It was chosen by specific people for specific reasons at specific moments in history. And then it became invisible through universal adoption. We stopped asking whether it was correct because everyone was using it. I do not know what year it is in any absolute sense. I do not think anyone does. What I know is that the number on the calendar was put there by a 6th century monk who was working from incomplete information, and that the number is probably wrong by at least 4 years by his own criteria, and that monk's numbering system has been the dominant global framework for over 1,000 years. If the calendar we live inside was built on a foundation that was wrong from the start, what else was? What other official systems did someone build, declare correct, and then make invisible through universal adoption? September means the 7th month. October means the 8th. The names have never been updated. Now that you know the calendar was chosen, not discovered, what else are you looking at differently? Let us know in the comments.